Good evening, and welcome to a series of critical conversations that we are having on Scroll in partnership with I and Survivors Against TB. My name is Chapal Mehra. I'm a writer and a public health specialist, and today we are going to be talking about the body as a site of violence. Over the last week, India has been shocked into reality by the gruesome rape and murder of a 19-year-old girl in Hathras. The murder and the crime raises several key questions, not just about the crime itself, but the many layers in which the crime was executed and is being interpreted. But more broadly today, we are going to be talking about the body and how, if you're a minority in India, the body has become as a site of violence throughout history. It's become as a tool of exerting oppression. Now, this violence can be of many kinds. It can be physical, it can be mental, it can be emotional, it can be sexual very often. But in all its forms, it's really a tool of repression that is being exercised on our bodies to assail the identities, the agencies of a different race, a different caste, a different gender, and very often a different sexual orientation. So as we grapple with this murder and this crime, I think it's really important to understand how we interpret it, how we understand it, not just with shock and outrage, but also how many layers, both historically and in current times, surround this crime and this violence. It would be simplistic to look at it purely as an act of lust or of violence. What does this tell us about our own relationships with our bodies and the relationship of the state with our bodies? This is really critical to understand and interpret. So addressing a lot of these questions, I'm going to be speaking to a very eminent set of panelists today. But before we do that, let me lay down the hygiene for this program. We start with a set of questions, but we welcome questions in English or in Hindi. अगर आपके सवाल अंग्रेजी में है या हिंदी में है, हमारे social media, through our social media, connect with us on Scroll, on SATB, on Pi, on Facebook. Please go ahead and ask our panelists and this program as many questions and queries that you have, because this program is not just a way to interpret this crime, but it is also a way to unravel and understand our relationships with the state at this point. So without further ado, let me introduce my group of panelists. Joining me today is Kiruba Munusamy, an advocate of the Supreme Court of India and also the founder of Legal Initiative for Equality. Welcome, Kiruba. And Dr. Saumya Uma, who is an academic, a very well-known academic and associate professor at Jindal Global Law School. Thank you, Uma, for joining us.
Thank you.
So let me actually turn to you, Kiruba, first. You have been speaking on this crime and this issue a lot. But I think we need to look at this point beyond the current incident and look at it, situate our interpretation in history and ask ourselves, this body that we are talking about of this low caste girl in Hathras is representative of the crimes or the oppression that happens against minorities of all kinds. And the body itself, especially of vulnerable genders, has become like a site of violence. So when you look at the Hathras case, what does it say to you? How should we be interpreting and reading this crime?
So when the first time the Hathras case broke out, all I could see is a pattern of impunity that the upper caste perpetrators enjoy and the kind of entitlement they have over Dalit women bodies. And most of the time, Dalit women bodies are brutalized when the upper caste have to teach a lesson to the Dalit communities and to show them their position and in order to deny their right as human beings and also not to allow them to assert their rights under law or even as basic human rights. And that impunity was something which was very disturbing because many people were asking us to not to bring caste into it and not to politicize it. But I was wondering, even women rights were for a very long time seen as personal family issues. So women getting battered and women being brutally raped were seen as family issues. And even now we are not able to acknowledge marital rape in this country. We are still struggling to bring a discourse on marital rape. So then feminist movements started politicizing women's issue, and because of the politicization, we have come to a point where we have many laws to safeguard women's rights, and we are now at a point where we are seeking for 33% reservation everywhere. So I think this politicization has been over the feminist movement and across various movements in the history. But when it comes to Dalit women bodies, this very politicization that feminist movements exercised were denied. And also, when we talk about Hathras case and violence against Dalit women, I think we lack the understanding of how even upper caste women are being complicit in the violences committed against Dalit women. And many of the times, the violence against Dalit women are seen as only rapes and not a denial of their rights or existence. And also, when it comes to domestic violence, people and academicians are very eager to discuss Dalit patriarchy, but not the contribution of caste in causing such domestic violences in the Dalit households. So when I was reading a paper about Dalit patriarchy, I was surprised to see how even wearing a jeans and modern outfit were considered as patriarchal, symptoms of signals coming from Dalit community, and how the factor that caste and the caste related denial of opportunities for employment and education have resulted in domestic violences against women. And also, if you closely look at the domestic violence against women, I think many women are not able to come out of the abusive families because they don't have alternatives as upper caste women do. They don't have safe employments like upper caste women do, and they don't have any other sort of alternatives where childcare responsibility or assurance of their social security are provided. So I think violence against Dalit women is not only committed by their own counterparts, but also upper caste counterparts, and also by the government that disowns Dalit women in most ways. And all the time, the only hope that we Dalit women had is on the legal institution, but the judiciary have also historically failed Dalit women. So if you look at the brutal rape of Bavari Devi, the Supreme Court says middle-aged men cannot have even raped. So the understanding of rapist, even of the judiciary is very shocking. And in Lakshmanpur Pate case, also 5 women bodies were mutilated. Eight pregnant women were murdered, and 5 women had the breast chopped off. And the High Court of Patna acquitted all the accused persons, and even breast tax. I see breast tax on Dalit women is also a kind of violence. And when people were discussing about menstrual leave, I wrote a tweet about how I was fired from a lawyer's office for taking a day off on my first day of period. And then people started questioning how is it a Dalit menstrual experience. So I think in the garment industry, most of the women who are exploited of their menses and who are made to work through 365 days, 24 into 7 are majorly from Dalit Bahujan communities. And I wonder if 100 Brahmin women had been working in a garment industry, whether the garment owners would have done this to them. So I think Dalit women bodies are exploited in the workplaces. They are denied wage for the labor they have done, and their physical unique experiences of menses and other forms of bodily diseases are also not considered as much as other medical concerns of upper caste women. And altogether, I honestly believe the experiences I, as a Dalit woman, face is primarily coming from caste, and then secondarily from my gender. So this intersectional perspective is what I think very much needed in understanding the violence against Dalit women bodies.
No, no, I think this is really great. Thank you so much for laying the background for this because I think it helps us expand our discussion and also focus it. Uma, let me turn to you with a lot of what Kiruba said and ask you this question. You've done so much work on body politics, but we are only talking of physical violence all the time. We think that is the only kind of violence that is perpetuated on the body. There is physical violence, there's mental violence, there's sexual violence, and there is and it's all being perpetuated everywhere, as Kiruba was saying. It's not just in an upper caste field that it is happening. It is happening within homes, it is happening within workplaces, it is also happening within educational institutions very often, where we are supposed to be free-minded and open-minded. What do you think of this kind of violence and as a form of repression?
Well, I think that one way of unraveling the violence, is to look at it through different aspects of the violence. One is the space of violence, which you, Chapel, spoke about just now, about violence within the home, violence in the workplace, violence in educational institutions, violence in custody, violence in conflict areas. So that's looking at the space of the violence. The second aspect I feel is looking at the actors and the power dynamics between them. So when we are talking about man, woman, adult, child, upper caste versus Dalit, employer, employee, or police versus accused, there is a certain kind of power dynamics between them, and that's something that I think is very, very important for us to remember. The third aspect is about the victim, and I would put victim slash survivor, because I think the journey from a victim to a survivor is a journey which for some people it can take several years, or in fact it might even take an entire lifetime. So I would say victim slash survivor. But looking at the marginalized identities among the victims, that is another aspect of unraveling the violence itself. So, of course, caste, class, religion, ethnicity, age, ability, disability, these are all axes of marginalization, and their intersections with gender, with sexuality, all of this then becomes a lens through which we can understand the violence more. I would say that a fourth axis of unraveling this violence is to look at the perpetrator and look at the kind of de facto and de jure power that the perpetrator has to enjoy a certain kind of immunity. When I say immunity, I'm talking about immunity from the justice process itself. And de facto is, of course, it is the power that is experienced in reality, and de jure is the power that is given by the law. So, for example, if we look at the upper caste members or the upper class members of a particular community, you will see that they exercise and they enjoy a particular kind of de facto power. If we look at those with economic, with political clout, with social clout, even religious leaders who exercise a certain kind of clout over their disciples. So there is this power dynamics, and then of course there are men in uniform, there are security officials who enjoy a certain kind of not only de facto power but also de jure power. There is a power that is given to them in law, and that power can lead to certain kinds of immunity. For example, we have a section called section 197, which actually uh, which has the requirement of prior sanction before any public official can be prosecuted for a crime. What this does is that in any case of a public official, of a government official, government servant, public servant, whatever you may call it, if they commit a crime, then in that case, unless the government permits the prosecution, there can be no prosecution. And very often we see in the records that the government does not provide the sanction, and because the government doesn't provide the sanction, that particular public official cannot be made accountable for the crimes that he or she may have committed. And this is a kind of de jure power that I'm talking about, which provides a blanket immunity to public servants. The fifth lens through which I would try to unravel violence is the typology of violence, which you mentioned right at the beginning, Chapel. Looking at it in terms of physical violence, mental or psychological violence, sexual violence, economic violence. So, the Domestic Violence Act, which was enacted in 2005, categorizes it as physical, mental, or psychological, sexual violence, economic violence. But then, going back to the question that you asked as to why is it that the physical violence comes into the limelight so much, firstly, because it is tangible. So when there is physical violence, we can see it, we can feel it, and there is a tangibility to it. And whenever criminal law plays a role, criminal law focuses majorly on physical violence. The aspect of psychological violence plays only a minimal role. It is about hurt to the body, it is about injuries to the body. So it is all, the focus tends to be much more on physical violence in that sense.
Okay. No, thank you for clarifying that. But a lot of raw points you raised were very useful, and Kiruba, I want you to take those to you, because in this particular case, the violence, as both of you have clarified, is multi-layered. But I'm particularly troubled by the fact that a lower caste young woman is found in brutalized and near dead in an upper caste fields, and the accused are all upper castes. But the state seems to deny it. The state seems to be going again and again and weaving a counter narrative. The denial of the body itself, its subsequent burning. I don't want to call it cremation because that would be justifying the act. Is another act of violence. And how do you see it, Kiruba? Very briefly, if you could touch upon that.
Yeah, so I think it is very clear that the government and the police, they have tried to protect the caste perpetrators because of the power that's been with the Thakur supremacy in the region, and we should not see it as an isolated incident in the in the state of Uttar Pradesh, because this is something which is pandemic in Uttar Pradesh, and there are many other cases where Thakur supremacy have come out with the number of sexual violences in the past. So yeah, and I'm not really surprised by the fact that the state and the police have done it, and they first denied rape, and then they burned the body. They did all such things, and now they are criminalizing the family for committing honor crime. And today morning, we received a message that they are also alleged of Maoist links. So the government would go to any extent to just protect Thakur men. And when we were talking about this violence, I was traumatized for the past 2 weeks by media houses by asking me to explain how caste is relevant in this case. So I will call it mental violence. They are inflicting violence upon me every time they ask me to stay strong, educate the upper caste people about how caste is relevant. And they are seeing Savarna Parishad had come forward to support the rapist. Thakur men have mobilized in caste panchayats, and they are defending the rapist. And Kshatriya Workers Union has come, and there was a video threatening the family and Chandrasekhar Azad. The government is not taking any action against Thakur men. Everything is out there, but they are violent enough to ask me to explain each and everything.
I mean, this is ironic and also deeply saddening, because this violence has now happened, but it is continuing in a way. against a certain section of the caste system, because now, even though there is institutionalized and historical evidence of this violence, through this public discourse, we are asking this violence to be explained again and again, as if we all didn't know about it or as if we didn't understand it. Now it has fallen on a certain section to explain this violence to the perpetrators, and this is another kind of violence, is
Yes.
what you're saying, Kiruba. And that is what is the height of it, because even if you look at these successive layers of violence, this is again and again becoming a way to assail the dignity, the freedom, and the agency of these individuals within the republic, in a way, right? You commit a crime against me, and now I have to explain that crime to you, even though the law very clearly states what the crime is. It is there for all to see. Uh,
Yeah.
what do you think about that, Kiruba? I mean, if you could touch upon that as well.
On one hand, we have the upper caste Thakur perpetrators. On the other hand, we have minority Valmiki families who are merely 4 or 5 families in the state. And we are witnessing the state and the government are aligning with Thakur groups, but still we are expecting a fair play, right? We know both are not on the same ground to engage in a fair play, and we know that justice is not guaranteed. But we are asking both the oppressor and the oppressed to fight in an institution which considers bringing two unequal parties to one place to prove the offense. And I was totally broken, Chapel, to be honest, when all these things were happening, because I didn't think this is something which should which should be like Dalit outrage or only Dalit anger. And whenever I talk about this, people call it Dalit anger. I don't know where this label is coming from, and they call it personal. That hurts me a lot. Yeah, of course, a woman is being brutalized, and the violence against her is totally denied by the government. Is it not personal for every woman in the nation? And it is not. Is it not violent? And is it not personal for all of us? Yeah, it is of course personal, but you know, I, I have only fatigue to contribute to this discourse, and yeah,
No, no, I totally understand what you're saying, because I've worked with sexual minorities all my life, and it is so hard sometimes to explain this, because I mean, there is also the intersectional view in sexual minorities, but one of the challenges is that even for a dominant majority, it is very hard to explain what is the crime, because they do not seem to see a violation of your rights at any point in time. You have to constantly argue. I mean, Saumya, let me take this to you. Kiruba is talking about actual fatigue, and this fatigue is dangerous because it means that the principle of fairness, equity, equality, or whatever you want to term it, is really withered in the republic. In a sense, she's talking about a system which is already unjust. Now you have to fight and try and achieve just outcomes in an unjust system when the public discourse is also pitted against you. I want to ask you a simple question. What does the law say? What should the police have done? What should the state have done? Which should have even sort of given us a sense of fairness.
I think to start with, in any case of rape of this kind, I think medical assistance, medical intervention would be the first step. In fact, the 2013 amendments to the rape law say very clearly that it is not necessary for for an FIR to be filed before medical assistance is provided to the victim. So because this was the procedure earlier, whenever a victim was rushed to the hospital would immediately say, oh, this is a medico legal case, so we will call the police, let the police come, let an FIR be filed, only then will we touch the victim. So 2013 amendments actually say that that is not necessary, and the first point has to be the medical assistance that is provided. In fact, the doctors have, every doctor, every hospital has a duty to provide that medical assistance. If it doesn't, if it fails to provide that, then that itself is considered a crime. So you have section 166A, which talks about dereliction of duties by the police. You have 166B, which talks about dereliction of duties by the doctors. And both of these were very, very important. The problem is that many of us don't know about it. Very few cases are registered under these sections. And so the police and the doctors do not do what they are mandated to do. The next aspect is, of course, the police, which should have filed an FIR at the earliest point in time. It doesn't even have to wait for the victim to tell them what happened. It can be anybody on behalf of the victim. It can even be a witness who has seen, who can give the first information. It is only a first information that reaches the police. The moment the police gets this information, they are supposed to register the FIR. That is the second step. And after that follows the investigation. And of course, there is also the arrest. There is a protection to the victims that has to be given. We have the Prevention of Atrocities Act, Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribe Prevention of Atrocities Act, which came in 1989. There were major amendments which were brought in 2015, 2016. And these amendments that came in were because of the ground reality, which was, which was communicated to the government. So the lawmaking process had the actual stakeholders from both the scheduled castes as well as the scheduled tribe communities, numerous consultations, and it is based on the ground level experiences that these amendments came about. One of the important aspects in those amendments is there is a fantastic chapter on witness protection. And it talks about victims' rights and witness rights, witness protection. There are so many aspects that are spelled out there. I was just looking at it today, before this started, and there are so many things. And this is one kind of a charter, I would say, of victims' rights and of witness protection. But it is not being followed in this particular case. So these are some of the steps. And then in investigation, there are, of course, many stages of that. Forensic evidence has to be collected at the earliest point in time, and so on.
Thank
I
you so
think
much.
I would like to add to what Dr. Saumya said. I think we all have enough provisions under law to protect witnesses and even protect the identity of the victim, but still the implementation is the major problem in the country. And it's not only in the Hathras case, but in all the atrocity cases. And specifically in the state of Uttar Pradesh, the police officials, the trial judges, and almost all the persons in power, they have accepted and they have localized the notion of caste sovereignty over rule of law. So that is why caste panchayats were able to exist in large numbers, and they decide over all the cases. And there were, in 2015 there was a caste panchayat order which ordered for gang rape of two Dalit sisters in Uttar Pradesh. And Amnesty International has to take this to the Supreme Court, and then the gang rape was stopped. So not only this case, there are many other cases where the caste panchayats take a big major role in deciding such punishments for women bodies, especially Dalit women bodies, because most of the 96% of the police officials in Uttar Pradesh are Thakurs. Chief Minister is also Thakur. And they think SCST, even invocation of SCST Act in the FIR is not necessary. So this is just not happening in Uttar Pradesh, but across the nation. I have been practicing law for 11 years now, and in all my experience, either there has to be a protest or we have to file a direction petition before the High Court for every single offense. So who has that much access to the High Court, or who has economic resources to afford to access High Court for every single instance, from the registration of case for to the filing of charge sheet, which is now fast tracked to 60 days. In other offenses, it's 90 days, but in SEST case, it's 60 days, and they don't even submit the caste certificate of the victim before the trial court. So there are many other procedural lapses that lead to the low conviction, and then Supreme Court comes with an entire different story and says all the low conviction is because most of the cases are false. So this is how impunity is being provided to the perpetrators from the police to the judicial system. And like Dr. Saumya said, we have an entire chapter on witness protection, and we have superb laws on witness protection. But who is going to protect the witness in the village, where 400 families are Thakur's and only 4 families are from Valmikis? And also there is a provision in the SCST Act where the Act says any offense against Dalit bodies have to be considered as caste-based. The court has to presume it as caste motivated, and unless otherwise it's proven. But when the police officials are under the understanding that this law is something which is irrelevant to any case relating to SCSTs, then it's literally bad. And also there are provisions which allows for financial assistance to the witness and the victims to come to the court every time. And in the Hathras case, even a layman who was watching the television would know the situation of the victim's family. But the Supreme Court simply adjourns the matter for 2 weeks, asking the state to provide protection. And it is the state who is not protecting the family, right? It was totally weird.
Sorry. Yeah. No. I just wanted to say one thing to our viewers before I get you to speak, because we're getting a lot of questions. So please keep sending us your questions. I'll start taking them immediately. We have about 4 questions already. Go ahead, Dr.
Okay. Can I just I just want to add one more aspect to what Advocate Kiruba was saying in terms of the procedural lapses and all of that. The SCST Act has a very, very very clear provision that the character of the woman cannot be used, and it doesn't, her past sexual acts cannot be brought in. So we have this situation of maligning her, saying that the call data records have been obtained and she was in touch with. So all of that really cannot so we see is this kind of call data records, even if they get produced, they get concocted, whatever is done with them in a court of law, that is inadmissible. But what it is doing is it is feeding into the media trial, it is feeding into the public discourse, and it is shaping all our minds into thinking, oh, maybe this is what she was. Maybe she actually deserved the rape. It is to get us to think that all these kind of counter narratives are coming, whereas it is very clearly prohibited in law to do that.
I want to take this very point and to bring it to you, Kiruba, because I think one of the problems that is with the narrative around this, like Dr. Uma was saying, is that it is really the powerful people and caste powerful people who continue to interpret this violence and, in a sense, continue to perpetuate further violence on the individual affected and their family and community. It is like a cycle, right? Because all the interpretations done in the media today are by upper castes in most of the time. And there is a counter narrative that is emerging of all kinds of things that Dr. Uma pointed to, which is basically creating a bias, a public bias against and a public maligning of sorts. Very, very, very strategic. What do you think about this counter narrative?
So I think now we are discussing about the past incident or history to which the girl cannot defend herself because she is no more, firstly. And secondly, even when there is a past relationship between the girl and the boy, it doesn't mean that this violence could not have happened. And this is something which is very specific to Dalit women. So the interaction between Dalit man and the upper caste woman is most of the time romantic relationship, and they mostly, end up in intercaste marriages. But the only interaction between Dalit women and the upper caste men are through violence. And even if they have a romantic feeling over upper caste male bodies, then they are insulted, shamed for having such sexual desires, and again they are taught a lesson by brutalizing them. There was a case in Tamil Nadu in which the girl was, in the name of love, the girl was being approached, and she was in a relationship with a man, and she became pregnant. And when she asked him to get married, he asked her to come to a particular isolated, abandoned place. And when she went, he and two of his friends brutally raped her. Her body was dumped in an abandoned well, and they have pulled out the fetus from her uterus. And this was a very famous case of Nandini in Tamil Nadu. And can you imagine, even after having, making a belief that they are in a relationship, he can go to the extent of killing her and raping her along with his friends. So this is something which is very specific to Dalit women bodies. And the fact, even if she had been in a relationship, or if there were proofs that they were in a relationship, it does not mean that this man could escape justice, or there is no commitment of violence in this particular case. And this is how every time they try to, invalidate or discredit the claims of Dalit women, especially in the sexual offences. And if you take the massacres in the Indian history, in the caste violences, where 10 women murdered, 20 women murdered, in all the cases, the Supreme Court judgments clearly show how the witnesses' statement and also the statement of the victims are discredited and invalidated. So this credibility of the victim statement or witness statement, and also the discretion, exercise of discretion of the judges in deciding the likelihood of the guilt, is where impunity is coming from. And that is how the upper caste men are encouraged to continue to commit violence, and the entitlement is again being strengthened by such judgments.
Yeah.
I want to, we are in the last 15 minutes of the program, and I do have to take questions, so I will. The first question that has come to us is, what sort of law do we have, do we need to have against the law enforcement and other government bodies when such immediate medical assistance is not provided, or an FIR or a documentation is not done? I think that's a broader question about where, how do we make these law agencies accountable? Because, medical assistance is one thing, but this is a systemic form of oppression, which they have no accountability for. Kiruba, let me ask you, and then Dr. Saumya.
I mean, you want me to answer to that question?
Yeah.
Briefly. So I think in the specific case of Hathras, there was no woman police constable who was accompanying the victim, to whom she could have explained many things. And in the dying declaration, she was telling that she has been forced. So this police are interpreting as she has not referred to any rape. And there are also chances that the victim wouldn't have been very comfortable in discussing about the incident of rape. And when such a complaint was made by the family members, and when she was found on a soak of blood, I think the police should have taken it, and they should have suggested to the medical professionals to do the needful. And I have a very big problem in the treatment that was given to Hathras victim. So when Nirbhaya was brutalized, we sent her to Singapore for treatment, but for Hathras, we didn't even send her to the AIMS, which was just located across the street. So this is how you show your concern for Dalit women bodies, and this is how the medical treatment which she deserves is being denied. So I think there are so many factors that leads to not sending the victim for medical test in other cases as well. For instance, in many sexual violence cases, they are not sent within 24 hours to the hospital, or the doctors wouldn't touch the Dalit women bodies to even examine. There are many such cases in the rural areas, which shocks us. And there are also many cases where sexual intercourse is not considered as rape, where the law clearly says there is no need for any injuries to prove rape, and just sexual intercourse is more than enough. And after Madhura's case, when a woman says she did not consent and she has been forced, the court and the police have to believe that she has been forced upon and she has been, raped. So there is no doubt about it. I
Uh,
think Dr. Saumya could add more to this.
yeah, Dr. Saumya, if you could add more on how we make these institutions accountable, because Kiruba is painting some of the fault lines that we seem to constantly ignore when it comes to Dalit women bodies.
I think one way in which more accountability can be had is by creating more awareness, because like the section that I was telling you about, section 166A and B, most of us don't know about it. So how would we even begin the process of filing any complaints for dereliction of duty? And that is an important aspect. If we are not aware of our rights, there's no way we are going to assert it. So I think that is one major aspect. I think there is a huge level of institutional bias. um, it is very clearly in cases of anti-Dalit violence, but it is also there in violence against Adivasis, violence against religious minorities, violence against sexual minorities. We see this kind of institutional bias that comes in. Kiruba was talking about the judges and how the judges said that a fully grown woman cannot be raped. In Bhavri Devi's case, the judges said even worse things. They said that an upper caste man will not touch a Dalit woman in order to rape her, and an uncle will not rape a woman along with his nephew. These are the kinds of observations. And we also have a reported case of a judge when he took when he actually started his work, because the earlier judge was a Dalit judge. This judge actually got the courtroom to be cleaned up before he,
Yeah.
so this
With
this
Ganga
is the
water.
kind,
Yeah,
With
no.
this
Ganga
is the
water.
kind
He
of,
brought Ganga
yeah,
water.
yeah. So this is the kind of institutional bias. And of course the police one doesn't, I think we are all aware of the kind of institutional bias that goes on with the police. I just want to mention a couple of other instances where I've seen this kind of institutional bias. One is the case of Sister Mina's gang rape, which was in a context of anti-Christian violence in
Mhm.
Kandhamal in Orissa. And when she was stripped of clothes, she was gang raped in a marketplace, she was dragged from a marketplace into a compound. There was a huge mob following her. After that, she actually pleaded for help before the police who were there, and the police did nothing. She in fact went and sat between two police officers who were there, in the hope that they will intervene, but they did nothing. So that's one other instance. And we also have the Vakapalli situation, where so many Adivasi women, they were actually raped, and they continue. Some of them have died now, but then many of them are continuing their pursuit of justice. And it has taken so many years for the police officials to be given the for the sanction to be given, so that the prosecution can start against these police officials. It's taken more than 10, 15 years or so. So that's the level of impunity that we are talking about. And one way of breaking that impunity is, of course, awareness raising. But I think more and more of us need to raise our voices, need to raise our concerns. Of course, the victim community has the prerogative, and its agency should never be denied in talking about what it is facing. But I think it is the duty of every public spirited citizen to extend solidarity and to voice our concerns and protest against this kind of thing.
And
And
since Dr.
sorry.
Saumya had mentioned about other two cases, I think I should mention about Madura case as well, because the police who didn't help Meena in Kandamal case, in Madura's case, two police officials raped this young tribal girl in the police custody, and then the court says, the trial court and the Supreme Court says that she is from a tribal community and she is habituated to sexual intercourse, and she could have incited the police who were drunk during the duty to even commit this offense. So this bias is explicit, and we know how the police are also biased against Dalit women. But the problem is, we in India, we don't have any process or methods to assess the implicit bias of the judges during administration of justice and in the delivery of justice processes. And in the foreign countries, Western countries especially, we have psychological tests even to check the racial biases, implicit racial biases of the judges. But here there are explicit biases available on the judgment, in the judgments, and we are afraid of even discussing about it. And even in the Hathras case, only the lower cadre police officials were dismissed, but I'm sure that the IG cadre official would have discussed about burning the body with the chief minister, chief secretary, and the home secretary, and the home minister. But what about them? Now, since they were suspended, everything will be conducted as disciplinary proceedings and in a closed room, and nothing will come out. And the accountability is not transparent in such cases. So I think such accountability could be possible only when these proceedings are transparent. And also, I think in order to bring police officials and the judges accountable, we have to have some form of mechanisms where they are made to inquiry, and there has to be structural reforms. When there was Jairaj Phoenix police brutality, we spoke of police reforms, but that's it. We left the conversation then and there, but we're not taking it forward. And I think there has to be a representation of all the minority communities in sharing the power and in the police force, so that there is internal resistance coming against such biases. So the structural reforms through proportional representation could be one way possible in the long run.
Thank you for this. I have now a ton of questions, and I'm going to give one question to each of you. I'm so sorry. The program has obviously got a lot of traction. People are very happy to hear from you. You will only have a minute to answer. I'm sorry, because we're in the last 5 minutes. The number one thing, Kiruba, I want to ask you is, we've not explored the issue of economics here, because all this denial, oppression, and factored and systemic oppression of all forms of caste violence are really economic violence as well, because we are denying people opportunity, we are denying people equality, we are denying people land, access to water, access to healthcare, access to education. If you could, in a minute, touch upon that, that is very critical, because people often think this is just two communities fighting together or two castes fighting together, but they do not see the broader economic and political representative picture, which gets missed, especially in urban India discourses.
So in Kilvanmani, 1968, 44 Dalits were burned to death just for demanding the right wages that they deserved. And in Kailanji, the land of Dalit family was tried to be encroached and appropriated by the upper caste, and the family was brutalized. The mother and daughter were paraded naked, gang raped, because they denied to give the property. So most of the time, the landowning communities are upper caste and the Dalit communities are landless, and they have to work on their agricultural fields. So we have the tradition of Dalit women bodies being exploited by the landlords in the past, and that tradition is being tried by the present landlords over Dalit women. And when there is a resistance, then there is also violence breaking out. And in other instances, when Dalit communities demand for higher wages is higher. I mean, I won't even call it higher wage. It is the fair wage they are asking for. And they are being brutalized. And when a Dalit woman is working in a corporate company, even, and when she is denied promotion, and when she is, asking for her rightful space, she has been character assassinated. And I know a case where she was not even recruited because she comes from a particular community and she did not study in a good university. But when somehow she got into the corporate company, and after getting into the company, she asked for promotion after 10 years, but she was denied. And in the end, it ended up in sexual harassment, and there was no one in the office who could believe that she would have been sexually harassed by the manager. And since there is no protection for Dalit women in the corporate companies, and there is no policy decisions to have diverse and inclusive recruitment processes, there were no other minority communities who could support this one woman in the corporate IT sector. So I think this is also a violence which go unnoticed because it is not much discussed. And in that one particular incident, I think the opportunity and the employment has played a vital role, and she had to tolerate all these things because she was the only breadwinner of the family. So economy is directly related to violence against women. And there is one I would shortly tell and close my conversation. And there is one particular article by Anu Ramadas in Roundtable India, in which she says a couple moves from Tamil Nadu to Bangalore as migrant construction workers. They don't have a house, and getting a watchman job in a construction site is a very big deal. So the Mestri, the managers who govern this construction, they exploit Dalit women bodies. And this man has gotten this watchman job, and everyone in the construction site knows it is because the Dalit wife, has shared the bed with him, with the upper caste Mistri. And then it ends up in domestic violence. And because the man was totally outraged that he is not able to give a roof over to the family, and she has to sexually exploited for this one small room that's been allotted to them in the construction site. So had there been any opportunity for them for a roof, for their livelihood, for their children's education, she wouldn't have to do this thing, and it wouldn't have to end up in domestic violence. So economy is always there, and economy is directly connected with violence against minority groups.
Yeah, we've reached the fag end of this conversation. Thank you so much for explaining that. I have one last question for you, Dr. Saumya, but you'll have to answer it like in under 40 seconds. This is a very important question.
How would I do that? I wouldn't even be able to finish a sentence.
Question. You're going to like it. It's Anupama Krishnamurti asks us that a former Supreme Court justice has said that there is some link between unemployment and rape, and it arises out of some natural feelings that men have. I don't know the veracity of this, but this is what she is quoting the ex-justice to say. Please, both panelists comment on whether or not this person needs to be banned on all social media platforms. I think that would be denial of the rights, several of his rights. But I think this is a dangerous.
Yeah, I can just comment on this natural feelings part of it. And we know for a fact all over the world, not just in India, all over the world, predominantly it is the men who are raping the women. So these so-called natural feelings, why is it that only men cannot suppress? And it is not as if women don't have sexual feelings. Why is it that they can control and it is the men who cannot control it? We have so many rape judgments which talk about rape as an act of lust. It is not an act of lust. It is an act of power. It is not about sex. It is about power. And I think that is one of the important things that we have to. So we have had this conversation about repression. We have had this conversation about how rape is used as a tool for punishment, for punishing the whole community, for shaming, for humiliating, and also to curb the agency of the woman herself. So it is clearly not about natural feelings. It is not an act of lust, but it is about exerting power, and it is about asserting a kind of supremacy. It could be that supremacy could come from patriarchy, caste, class. It could be a combination of many things, but that's where I see it as coming from.
And Chapel, can you imagine the kind of judgments that would be coming from such a former judge? And we have to study all the judgments that's been delivered by him, and let alone blocking him from social media. We should make his judgments accountable, and we should reverse all those judgments, citing to his explicit bias on social media.
But first, we have to be able to read those judgments, which may be into hundreds of pages. That is the every judgment that's coming out now is so voluminous. To be able to read it, to even understand where is the bias, it takes so much time and effort.
No, and I think thank you so much both for this conversation, because I think you've unpacked this case in an institutionalized caste, religious, sexual violence in so many ways. and I hope our viewers will appreciate it. I'm so sorry. I want to apologize to our viewers. There were many, many questions, and I'm sorry we couldn't take all of them. But I hope this gets you thinking. This gets you started thinking about the social bias that already exists, the biases that we are institutionally taught and have to unlearn. And more importantly, when you expect justice and fairness from an already unequal system, we are all minorities somewhere. And if you think about it carefully, you will understand how much more this becomes difficult for those with multiple vulnerabilities. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me, and see you again next week for another interesting conversation. Thank you, Kiruba. Thank you very much.